We're about a minute past 1:30, so I see there's still a few people. The numbers still keep ticking up, but we'll start to get started and go through the overview here. Thank you all for registering and participating today. We have a great webinar panel here of folks in the utility industry to talk about. This is our second webinar in a series of webinars that Burns has been hosting, mapping out the fleet electrification journey. This is titled Electric Utilities Charge Ahead, and we've got some leaders here in the industry to show how utilities are both supporting their customers and their transfer to electric vehicles or electric fleets, and as well as how regulatory authorities are approaching that in that space, and also how the electric utilities are looking to lead and develop their own internal fleets in this space as well, and show kind of thought leadership and lessons learned themselves on how they can be examples to others in the space of how to electrify your fleet. So this is, like I said, the second in a series of webinars. Our first webinar was held back in May, and if you go to the Burns website, www.burns-group.com, and go to our news page, you can find the recording of that webinar that was mapping out the fleet electrification journey webinar. It was some folks that were leading pilots in that space to talk about in general what the first lessons learned were. There will be a third in our series of webinars in June, so stay tuned for that. That will be focused on transit authorities and their efforts to electrify their bus fleets. So we've got a good panel set up for that to talk through how the different authorities are approaching that effort. So with that, I will go back to the slide deck here, and we'll run through introductions of our panel. Let's see. Okay. So first, I will introduce Tom Bonner. He is the manager for state government affairs with PECO Energy. So, Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Bonner, as Mike said, manager of state government affairs for PECO. PECO is the electric utility for the Pennsylvania side of the Philadelphia metropolitan area, Philadelphia and its surrounding counties. Been working in the electric vehicle space for about a dozen years now, dating back to PECO's involvement in the Federal Smart Grid Investment Grant Program and some demonstration projects we did with those first generation EVs back then. And today we have a fully dedicated team that works on EVs, both internal implementation and supporting customer enablement.
Thanks, Tom. And then Joe Morreale, section manager, electric vehicle demo projects. He actually is the lucky winner of doing 2 of these webinars. He did such a good job, we invited him back for the second.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Joe Morreale, section manager of demo projects and managed charging in our EV group here at Con Edison, which services New York City and Westchester County. And very excited to be back and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Joe. And then Dawn Neville, manager electric transportation with PSE&G.
Yes, thank you very much. As Mike said, I'm manager of electric transportation at PSE&G. I'm in the process of building a team to implement our recently approved program to build EV charging infrastructure for light duty vehicles, and simultaneously working on a proposal for a medium heavy duty program.
Looking forward to hearing more about that. And then Mark Warner, Vice President with Gabel Associates.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I lead our EV utility practice, which we started here at Gabel a little over 5 years ago. I spent that time doing a lot of work with utilities as they plan and design their electric vehicle programs, and especially doing a lot of work with getting those programs approved through the regulatory process. So I hope to share with you today some of my experience working with 10 different utilities in 5 different states. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Just one other item on logistics as we get into the questions. We'll have questions that our panel will go through and speak to We've got a list of questions to run through. If there are audience questions, you can either send them through the chat or through the Q&A, which is a function in the toolbar of the webinar. We will be able to see the questions, and we can either respond to you over text, and I'll try to bring them up as moderator here to the group. We can incorporate it into that, or we may wait till the end to incorporate some of those. But feel free to send those all along the way, and we'll fit them in where we can. And with that, I'll move on to our first question. So for all of you, let's battle it out on who's going to start the answer here, but briefly describe the role of the utility in fleet electrification and how each of your companies are approaching that role. You can give a high-level program of both internal, external programs that you're dealing with. So maybe Tom, I'll shoot it over to you since you started the intros.
Sure thing. So start off, Mike, by saying, again, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. We really see transportation electrification as a core element of our climate and clean energy strategy. And we think is a great opportunity to be able to do economic development and environmental benefit at the same time. We see opportunities across the full transportation chain, light, medium, and heavy duty, and also off-road and industrial applications. One of our biggest projects to date has been working with the Port of Philadelphia to electrify their cranes, and now we're working on all the ground support equipment. We really see this in three categories. We have to invest in people. We need to develop new programs for electrification. And in terms of the people, we've stood up our own EV team, build up expertise, subject matter experts, large customer reps who can be those first points of contact with customers that are interested in infrastructure projects and have really become experts on facilitating. We have what's called our Green Power Connect, which does the nuts and bolts work of getting those interconnections approved and up and running. We do a lot of customer outreach, sponsored the Philadelphia Auto Show electrification booth in 2020, did the largest EV-focused program ever in Pennsylvania back in 2018. We also are walking the walk with our own fleets. So along with our colleagues at Exelon Utilities, we have a commitment to electrify 30% of our service vehicles by 2025 and 50% by 2050. Now that's all going to be technology dependent on the availability of those vehicles, but that commitment includes fully electric, plug-in hybrid, and then electric idle mitigation, which is great for when the vehicles are in the field and you're not burning diesel just to keep, into those neighborhoods and communities, just to keep the cab warm and the boom operating. And externally, we offer limited incentives now. We don't have an established program in Pennsylvania. So we've been, experimenting through with our Public Utility Commission about some initial pilots. Our colleagues out in Western PA at Duquesne are doing the same thing. We've recently filed a more companies and commercial customers to put in level 2 charging for their employees, customers, and fleets. And we're proposing $1 million investment partnership with our public transit agency, particularly as they look at en route charging, which they believe is critical to doing electrification at scale. And the last piece for us is trying to drive that state policy to get to a coordinated approach to sensibly build out a open access, interoperable electrification infrastructure so that anyone who wants to buy an EV in the state feels comfortable they can do that.
Great. We can definitely things to follow up on there. Joe, we'll go in the same order we did introductions. So if you can expand on where Con Ed is, how Con Ed is approaching this.
Yeah, so I think the lowest hanging fruit has always kind of been the first for us to grab. And so with our PSC, right, we're really focused on our state's policy goals under the multi-state ZEV MOU, zero emission vehicle MOU, trying to reach the critical thresholds of vehicles on the road being zero emissions by 2030. So to that end, right, the focus at the moment is really about enablement. So we've got our utility side make ready program for offering incentives and developers looking to install infrastructure. That's kind of where we're starting. And then as we go, the focus is really on, okay, once we are comfortable in the work we're doing to kind of lay the groundwork here, where do we take it from there? What is the best pathway for the utility to follow? And that's something we're looking very closely at now. We also offer a managed charging opportunity right through our Smart Charge program. So that's really very low cost from the utility perspective way to incentivize primarily residential customers, but increasingly fleets and medium and heavy duty vehicles to shift their charging behavior to really super off-peak times that benefit the utility. And then our residential customers can earn a little bit of an incentive in the process. We recently opened that up at like the end of 2020, opened that up to fleets and medium and heavy duty vehicles, like I said, looking at what the engagement with the kind of current incentive rates is and trying to figure out if that's appropriate or if we need to do more in that space. But again, just at the moment, it's enablement and it's charging behavior are the two primary drivers that we have going out. We also have our Make Ready program has since expanded. It is available for medium and heavy duty vehicles as well. So the team's working through applications for those. And then the last bit I will add is that we are, we're also starting to electrify our own fleets as well. We rolled out our first 2 electric bucket trucks. I think like last week we made the press release. So perhaps a little bit further behind than the PECO team, but looking to really just gather data at this point, get a sense of how our operations will impact battery duty cycles and working towards full fleet electrification as we go forward.
Great, and we'll definitely follow up with our next question on that internal fleet electrification program. So, Dawn, just briefly describe how PSE&G is approaching this market.
Sure. So PSE&G, clean energy and clean future, decarbonization, very important initiatives. We have 5 pillars, one of which is electrification of transportation. So it's been a focus for quite some time. We as well have an internal goal at PSE&G that by 2030, 100% of our passenger cars, 60% of medium duty, and 90% of heavy duty will be either hybrid, plug-in hybrid, battery, or anti-idle electric systems, as Tom mentioned. In addition, we just received BPU approval, the first in the state of New Jersey, for an EV program. So we'll be implementing a Make Ready program to help customers with the cost of installing charging infrastructure. It's right now geared towards light duty and not fleets for that matter. But we will be helping with residential customers to put chargers in their homes. We'll be helping with multifamily, government facilities, retail centers, gas stations, and also highway locations with DCFC chargers. As part of that program, we also do have a managed charging incentive that we're offering to incent better charging behavior, as Joe alluded to. And we also have an incentive for demand charges because that is a barrier to the DCFC market right now. We're working right now to start that program. We're looking to implement it, launch the implementation in June, and it will run through 2026. Simultaneously at the BPU, we're just initiating a stakeholder process for medium heavy duty vehicle electrification, and they are grouping fleets into that category. So we're working really hard on policy and putting together a draft proposal where we can partner with New Jersey Transit, work on the next program for electrification of medium heavy duty.
And then Mark, bring a little bit different perspective from the outside and regulatory markets. Just talk a little bit about where you see fleet electrification, electric vehicles going.
Michael. And as you know, it would be worthwhile for me to comment really on maybe some general trends that I see happening with on this question of utility role across different states where I've been working and across different utilities, each of which has their own perspective. So we've been looking at this and doing a lot of analysis over the last 5 years, not just on what do we need to do to serve the number of electric vehicles on the road today, but what do we need to do when we get to 2025 and 2030 and so on. And many states, including a lot of the states represented on this call here, are leading states for EV adoption and have set some very aggressive electrification goals. Many of those leading states expect to increase the number of electric light-duty vehicles on the roads by a factor of 10 over the next 4 to 5 years. So this isn't just a question of today, it's a question of how do we deal with this rapidly expanding market over time. And our conclusions from that analysis is that this really is a transformative transition. Vehicle electrification doesn't just change how we're all going to drive and the cool vehicles that we can buy. It's also going to have a really significant impact on the grid itself. And therefore, this question of what the right utility role is, what the most meaningful perspective from a regulatory body is really relevant on how we navigate through that transformative experience. And I guess I'd offer a couple of observations from having worked in several states. First of all, it's widely varied. Each utility has different perspectives on what they're interested in doing, and each regulatory commission has a different perspective on what they're interested in supporting. So if you go through the top 10 states, it's basically all over the map on their perspectives about what the utility role would be. And I can say more when we get towards the end about how I see that evolving over time. But if I could try and generalize some trends on how people are trying to think about this, it seems like what everyone's searching for is that intersection between what is an unmet need in the market, because we have private for-profit companies that are building a lot of this infrastructure. So trying to understand what is the unmet need given that existing for-profit business, and what are the things that a utility is uniquely able to do, either better than or in some cases things that other people just can't do. So where we can find the intersection between unmet needs and unique utility role, those are becoming sort of the focus areas for defining what the utility role should be. And I sort of see three things coming up as the current consensus on what that utility role might focus on. One is in the general area of make ready. So as we're building charging infrastructure, all the details about how that charging infrastructure interfaces with the public grid and a role for the utility in making that effective, reducing barriers and so on, is something that most people have decided makes sense for a utility. The second one is looking especially at public charging, because I think a lot of people on this call recognize that consumer perceptions that there just aren't enough public chargers out there, especially fast chargers, is a primary barrier to adoption. And so to the extent utilities can play a role in helping accelerate that public charging infrastructure development, that can really facilitate that factor of 10 growth that we need to accomplish over the next 5 years. And that's especially true in the area of high-powered public fast charging, because those are more demanding applications, and that's exactly the kind of charging that consumers are looking for. And the third one is what I generically call managed charging, but that can mean a lot of different things. But the big focus area is we all know that most charging is going to happen in the residential setting, somewhere between 70 and 90%, depending on who you believe, of the charging is going to be done at home. And if that all happens at peak time, that could potentially add a lot of load and therefore a lot of costs that all ratepayers have to bear. But it turns out that most consumers have a lot of flexibility on when that charging takes place. And so if there's programs that we can do, whether that's a rate design or some other kind of incentive program that would help encourage optimal charge scheduling to try and push that scheduling off the peak and onto times when it minimizes the impact on the grid, that would have a broad benefit for everybody, and that's a role that a utility would have a particular role in. So All three of those, I think, are good answers to the question of what a utility role is today. And I think that will continue over time and then might get expanded as we understand better what the market needs are.
Great. I'm actually going to already audible into the third question because it just leads right into those three topics that you're talking about, Mark. Make-ready programs, where utilities roll in the actual providing some charging in some of those large public settings that you're describing. So I'll open it up to the group. Where are each of you? How are you approaching the make-ready programs? What type of vehicles or customers are you trying to incentivize there or provide that for, or any other incentives or your own EV charging options? So Dawn, Joe, or Tom, I'll open it up.
We are just looking to launch in June. It's targeting 40,000 single-family homes to install level 2 network chargers. We're looking to A, upgrade the service if needed, and then B, provide incentives to offset the costs to install the necessary plug for the level 2 charger in the home. We also are looking to, our program has 875 sites that are level 2 commercial sites. Those might be multifamily, government, publicly accessible, retail, etc. And again, we're looking to support the cost on both sides of the meter for installation of those chargers rather. And finally, a make-ready program for the highway locations. The way we support our customers, not only through that make-ready program, but also, as Tom mentioned, we have business customer solutions working really hard with our customers, our large customers, to help them determine their fleet electrification plans and plan for the necessary, service and energy usage that they're going to need for that fleet electrification.
Tom or Joe?
I'll add on to that a little bit. With respect to the make-ready program specifically, we're not super discriminatory at the moment, right? We'll take all comers. Obviously, as I alluded to before, right, there are advantages you can have for making sure your charging is publicly accessible. That's a big area for us. Making sure that the charging plugs you're installing aren't proprietary, right? So ideally, we want some type of universal J plug or something that can service the broader market as opposed to technology or manufacturer specific plugs. And then finally, we're also keeping a very close eye out on where these charging hubs are being installed, right? Ideally, we would want these in some type of disadvantaged community centralized location, right? So that we can claim the benefits there of really bringing this technology to those DACs. So from a, overall perspective, it doesn't matter what you want to do, but you can earn additional incentive dollars based on the method and style of your installation. Long term, where I see this going is I really see this work now kind of serving as a lot of like lead generation for the utility, right? It's helping us get in touch with who the players are in this market, right? The developers, the customers who want to have this installed. All of that is going to become very helpful in the next like 2 to 5 years, I think, as we look to go to the next step of, okay, how do we turn these customers, vehicles to electric, right? They're not necessarily going to do it on their own, but the fact that we can establish ourselves in the field here today as this reliable, trusted partner who can come get you incentives, get you set up with the equipment you need, when we then return to them and say, okay, let's talk about how we can make your fleet or your personal vehicles fully electric, they'll be much more receptive to that conversation.
Yeah, Mike, I could take the easy way out and just say everything that Joe and Dawn just said, because I think they hit a lot of nails on the head there. Just segmenting by customer types. For the residential customer, we have a almost nominal $50 incentive. That's really just so we know where the EVs are coming on the system, so our capacity planning team can do that tracking and look toward future localized issues. But our big thing is we have a web-based EV toolkit that is one-stop shop for any customer, any information, any customer who's interested in potentially buying an EV. They can learn about vehicles, charging stations, charger types, you name it, incentives that are available. For the commercial customers there, we're really looking at the level 2 incentive. It's a $500 incentive currently that's really a supplement to our state DEP's VW funding program. But as that phases out and down, we've applied with the PUC back at the end of March to establish a $500,000 program to take that broader, and there would be a more generous incentive for stations in environmental justice communities, similar to what Joe was talking about. And then for the high-speed fast chargers, there we currently offer a 50% demand charge relief rate to try to incentivize that. And we also do offer, forgot to say, for the residential side, just introduced a home time of use rate. It is a whole home time of use rate. We're going to have to do some additional work to look at getting that down to a vehicle-only rate, but that is, kind of on the radar screen.
Good. And I did get a question. This is specific in the PECO territory, but I'm interested how each of the utilities would approach it. I mean, for a customer, this customer actually is a college campus, and they're looking at how they address commuter needs and providing for charging for those commuters. What suggestions would you have for commuter college campuses or industrial campuses as they're going through this planning on their side, and how to communicate that with their utilities, and how are the utilities approaching this from a grid planning perspective too?
So the first stop would be to go to a college or university that has a large customer account representative. If their account representative wasn't one of the folks who have become our subject expert, matter experts, they bring in and partner with a couple of our LCS representatives who become experts on EV. They would then lead them to our Green Power Connect group, which does the initial look at the existing capacity and hookup. It's the same people that help customers with solar installations. What we found is we built up that whole group and found it's the same skill set that is needed to assist customers with EV installations. And then ultimately that goes to our capacity planning group. And same thing, we've been training up over the last several years experts in helping facilitate those installations. If you don't have a account rep, we have information on our website for who to go to work with us on that. We want to help everyone electrify. If it moves, we want to electrify it.
Great. Tom or Joe, anything to add to that? I'm sorry, Dawn or Joe?
I'll only add that, that's probably a little bit less of a concern in New York City. Westchester certainly has similar issues. But I think I'll echo the prior comments, right? It's going to be a lot of hand-holding as we go through this process. We want to make sure these customers are taken care of. And I foresee the relationship going beyond just here's some money, install some chargers. But to the extent that we're even still in the very early days of like fleet assessment services that we've been ordered to do by our Public Service Commission, we are currently trying to figure out exactly what that means, exactly what our commitment is, and how best to serve the needs of our customers there. So I do see some hand-holding there. And how exactly that plays out is yet to be seen. But that we do envision a role for the utility there.
I'm going to skip back here to...
Michael?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
A real quick thought to that. We've been working with a variety of clients on helping them figure out their electrification and charging requirements. And what we found is the most valuable first step is to segment, really understand the different kinds of charging that need to be done. So if you take the example of a college campus, you can do charging for residents, that looks in essence like residential charging for people that are living on campus. You can do charging for fleet vehicles. You can do public chargers for people in the community. And so on. And those are very, very different use cases and technologies and information needs and everything else. So a lot of people don't realize that not all chargers are created equal, and that these different use cases imply very different technology approaches. And so the first step for any customer that we work with is let's sort out what kind of charging you're really interested in doing. And then once you have that segmentation, then everything else falls out from that.
Yeah, as well as their impact to the load and demand on your system and the timing of that, obviously. So going back to how internally you're addressing your goals, 2025, 2030 goals on all electric or plug-in electric or portions of your fleet. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of that and how you're approaching it? Whether it's from is it technology that is you're waiting on to implement those, or is it more of just the logistics of transforming your fleet to electric over that time?
So I'll gladly start on that one. Our biggest issues really are logistical. Yes, there's technology that we need to come for some of the really heavy duty, but as Mark alluded to before we even got started, a lot of the transportation is not that super heavy duty. We have a significant amount of utility service technicians that are home-based. And with that home-based reporting, how exactly are we going to convert those vehicles and then charge them within the design of their work style and them living home? And they may or may not live in our territory. They may or may not own their home. All sorts of logistics like that. We also are trying to make sure we build out, just like our customers need to do, what infrastructure do we build out at our facilities for the 10% conversion, then the 50% conversion, then the 100% conversion? How many iterations do we want to go through versus how much do we want to overbuild now for our future plans? So that's something all of our fleet customers need to evaluate, as do we.
Well said. We're talking to a few folks on that, and that is definitely what we see is kind of the scalable modular approach, understanding where you need to get to and ways to cost effectively get there without kind of overbuilding or overspending to start with. Tom or Joe, anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, Mike, some things we found with our early pilots on the electric, bucket trucks that had the electric bucket, not the electric drivetrain. It really is important. We feel we need to understand what the vendor strategy is for service, for parts, for supply, for helping us maintain those vehicles. That's a big challenge for our fleet. We have very well established systems for conventional vehicles. We need to make sure that that is replicated as we move toward electrified vehicles. The same questions Dawn talked about in terms of the charging infrastructure and employees taking those vehicles home. That's something that needs to be sorted out. And distance, that is so critical to the efficiency of our industry. Being able to rely on our colleagues at other utilities when we get hit by those extreme weather events, and vehicles have to be able to travel long distances. They have to be able to operate on sometimes 16-hour cycles. And as you plan out the infrastructure, you need to do so in a manner that that takes mutual assistance into account.
Yeah, when you're all being called up for storm duty and there's 3 times as many trucks as are typically there and they're all in and out, we definitely, that's the time to keep the lights on. So we want to make sure that there's power available and charging infrastructure available to those at that time. So I know that's another issue that we've run into and talking to different utilities about. Joe, anything else to add to that?
I would just add that our challenges are primarily logistical as well. And it's less so on the market side. It's more on the internal staffing and really rising to meet the challenge here. We have very ambitious goals set by our PSC. I think they equate to over 18,500 L2 chargers by 2025 and a hair under 500 DCFC chargers, right? And that came out at the end of last year. We are, we have targets we need to hit at a midpoint. And so really pushing to stand up our operations here. And so that's really where the primary constraint is making sure we have the internal processes and teams functioning properly to process these applications in a timely manner. Because anything we miss, we're gonna have to go back and revisit, and the pile is just gonna keep growing.
Yep. onto the regulatory side, and I have a question from the group too here to expand on this. But and Mark, I'll point this to you to give a better overview of maybe how different states are approaching this. But what has been the regulatory approach to electric vehicle infrastructure in your states thus far, and how do you see that evolving? One of the questions that I got from our registrants was about, especially on the make-ready side, what the utility's responsibility is for the infrastructure and whether they're able to provide and install charging, or whether that's a third party that's doing that. I know that on the regulatory side, that seems to be one of the debated issues. So maybe if you want to touch on that while you're answering it.
So in terms of the general regulatory approach, I touched on that a little bit in my earlier comments about how people are thinking about it today, and especially trying to find that overlap between unmet needs and unique utility role. And then related to the question that was asked, what I see most states doing is acknowledging that this isn't going to be an either or. It's not going to be just the private market or just the utility. It's going to be what I like to think of as an ecosystem approach, where the utility and private contractors and private investors together are building out this infrastructure, and then figuring out the right roles and responsibilities between those entities is in essence the heart of the regulatory approach. So thinking about how this might evolve over time, right now I see, when I look across the multiple states that we've worked in, the approaches are varied, as I've already mentioned, but they're also fairly cautious and evolving. Most of the commissions seem to be, rather than just making big commitments to utility involvement, they're sort of incrementally approving what seems to be the most necessary at each point in time. And then if there are additional unmet needs, then looking at additional utility involvement. So if you look at the history in California, they're further ahead than most states on this. What they did quite a ways back was they initially committed to a very minor role for utilities and infrastructure build out. Then after several years, they backed off of that and then committed to a more significant utility role. And I see sort of most states going through something similar of trying to figure out, where on that spectrum is the right balance between the utility role and the rest of the market participants. But I think there's three guiding principles that will ultimately determine where each state ends up. One is that there's no doubt that the utilities have a legal obligation to ensure responsible grid integration of these loads. So as we add new infrastructure, as that changes the load profile on the grid, the utilities will need to make sure that allows them that they can continue to deliver safe, reliable, cost-effective service as those loads are changing. And what's new about this compared to sort of traditional load changes is that can be done just by building more copper, or can be done by building programs that influence how the loads come onto the network. And things like make-ready program, I think it's evolving to not just be, we'll give you some dollars to install a charger, but we'll try and do that in a way that mitigates what the grid impact is, so that we don't have to just do reinforcement, expensive grid reinforcement that could have been avoided. So as this regulatory perspective evolves, I think this principle of responsible grid integration will be a guiding light for deciding what that utility role is. The other one is there is something that only utilities can do, which is rate design. And so when we look at some of the bear market in really all the segments, there are how electricity is priced has an impact on when people charge and whether they electrify or not, and where they electrify, and so on. So I think there will be a growing focus on understanding how utilities can optimize rate design to strike the right balance between removing barriers to electrification, but also ensuring that the right balance is met in terms of ratepayer impact. And that's always a difficult needle to thread. And the last one is that I think there will be an evolving perspective on underserved segments. There are going to be some areas in this market that private investors are just not as interested in serving, at least at the pace that will let us increase the number of vehicles by a factor of 10 in 5 years. And I think one of the good examples of that is multifamily. That has proven to be a segment that's very, very difficult to serve. And so that may be an area that merits a broader utility role. So I think over time, as we get a better understanding where the different market participants are most comfortable playing, that will help clarify what the right utility role is over time. So those three ideas of responsible grid integration, the unique role for utilities in rate design, and then better clarity on what the underserved segments are will help guide each state over the next 5 to 10 years on what the utility role needs to be. And it's a very state-by-state specific question. The last thing I'll add is a lot of that discussion was really around what the utility role is and how we should make, you know, regulatory determinations on program filings. The other question is recovery. So even if we had agreement on what a particular program should be, there's an additional question about what kind of recovery should be approved for utilities in support of those programs. And they can really differ by the program. So when you think about a public charging program, for example, that's supporting assets that are in essence used by everybody. So, you know, there's one level of recovery that may be appropriate in that case. Other programs that may benefit just a particular segment, there may be a different perspective on what the right recovery is. So we need to think about what the right role of the utility is, but in parallel with that, we need to sharpen and improve and grow understanding on what the right recovery strategies are. And I think that's going to evolve over time as well.
And
So that's all I have,
yeah.
unless there were questions that I could address.
I guess I will jump in here. And Pennsylvania is tricky because we don't have a statutory framework for, you know, for the regulatory role of the utility in promoting this infrastructure. It's what we at PECO have been active with a coalition helping to try to develop. I think a lot of the things that Mark just mentioned are, you know, at the forefront of our thinking. Joe talked earlier about that systems should be interoperable. We don't want to strand investment. I think if the utility customer is going to pay a lot of the cost of financing that public access charging network, then it needs to be done in a way where there are regulatory protections in place. I'm personally a little bit skeptical of the make-ready model where it applies to the DC network fast charging, because then I think you're putting all the cost on the utility customer, or a lot of those costs on them, and then kind of turning an asset loose to see what it can gain on the market. That's often not the best way to do regulation. So you need to have that balance of, if the ratepayers are going to help pay for it, what uses do they get out of it, and what protections do they have? I think that needs to be sorted out as part of both legislative and regulatory policy. And because we don't have the legislative framework yet, our commission hasn't really dug into the details as you would have seen in New Jersey or New York. So I'll let those folks comment on that. They've been interested in seeing pilots to begin looking at these questions and letting them kind of learn how to adjudicate them.
How do you see, I know that there's a wide variety of folks on the webinar for like a college campus or a transit authority or airports that are serving kind of the greater public. How do you see those types of facilities fitting into the electrification and transportation model?
I'll just jump in real quick. I think that's where the make-ready model makes all the sense in the world. You're helping them overcome that initial cost of investment. That is infrastructure that is almost guaranteed to be used and used for many years to come. It will pay itself back in the long term. It's why we exist as utilities.
Yeah, and Mike, add there is another,
nice softball, Mike.
I was just going to add, there is another dimension to electrification that many states are focusing on, which is equity. As a lot of overburdened communities are along these dense travel corridors in the urban core where traffic-related pollution is really severe. So electrification has a significant impact there. But also when we get to things like mass transit, buses, ride-sharing services, and so on, we want to make sure that all communities, all ratepayers, all communities can participate in electrification equitably. And that's another area where I see commissions, focusing on potential utility role is making sure that those equity goals are met. And as Tom was just mentioning, for example, making sure we can overcome the interconnection and charging infrastructure needs for public buses, for example, is a real clear area where that works. So the faster we can electrify buses, that clearly has a lot of public benefit that has equity dimensions as well.
Yeah. Joe or Dawn, anything else to add to that?
I think Tom and Mark covered it very well.
Great.
Yeah, same here.
Just got about 15 minutes left in it, so we'll go around on this last question here. What would one piece of advice be for organizations looking to implement new fleet electrification? Tom, you kind of covered this a little bit already with the college or large commercial campus that would be looking for it and how to approach that. But I don't know if there's any other lessons learned other than get to talk to your utility, early and often. Outside of that, are there any other items that they should be looking at to bring to you? What type of information should they be prepared with? Maybe similar to what Mark was speaking to earlier.
Well, I think
Dawn, go ahead.
one piece of advice I have that isn't what information they can bring, but what information they need to realize they may not even realize energy management. They understand fuel management, right? If the price of gas or diesel goes up or down X cents, they know the impact to their operating costs. Energy management is a lot different, right? There's a lot of issues about peak and on what their costs are going to be could be impacted by one given day, and that can impact their next year's costs. So understanding that energy management, looking for ways to do peak shaving, add energy storage that will help with both peak shaving and reliability. All of those things need to be evaluated as an organization looks to go electrified fleet.
I think I would offer someone two connected thoughts in response to this question. One is, as you're thinking about electrification, this is something that's changing so fast and likely to be scaling up a lot more quickly than people realize. And so don't just think about like the 2 cars you want to buy this year. Think about your needs are going to be 5 years from now, especially given that a lot of this infrastructure involves, digging up parking lots, putting in conduit, those sorts of things. So be thinking a little bit about what your longer term needs are and how you can be doing some of your initial projects in a way that includes some future proofing and then helps minimize both the hassle and the costs associated with stepping up to those growing needs over time. There's a lot of efficiencies that could be gained by doing some of this infrastructure right up front. And then the related piece is a lot of people immediately jump to the vehicles, what kind of cars are available, how much they're going to cost. But the other piece that's equally important is the use cases. So you can have 2 physically identical vehicles that are used in fundamentally different ways and therefore require different kinds of charging. Just think about, for example, a medium duty local delivery vehicle that could look just like a private vehicle. It charges at night and then has enough charge in the battery at the morning to get it through its delivery cycle during the day. Or you can have the exact same vehicle that, because of its route, requires several fast charges in the middle of the day. So those are 2 completely different use cases that go along with the same vehicle, and it's those use cases that have a lot of impact on what kind of charging technology is needed, what the load implications are going to be, where the infrastructure needs to be, and then you start to get into issues about space and reliability and those sorts of things. So my advice would be to, yes, you got to understand the vehicles and how you're going to evolve those over time, but make sure you're thinking about the use cases that go along with that, because that's just as important as the vehicle itself.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, Mark, I mean, trying to go with some of the low-hanging fruit, you might want to start with the vehicle that does the overnight charging, as opposed to the on-route charging and trying to figure out the logistics of where to put those chargers or what chargers are available for that. So, that should be a part of that overall strategy and planning for that. Joe or Don, anything to add to that?
I'll add simply that, yeah, I'll echo the point about, really forcing fleet operators to think about more than just the basics of turning things over, right? You really have to help them look at that total cost of ownership over the life of the vehicle. And again, that's an opportunity for utilities to come in and really be that trusted partner. And it helps build not only the utility brand in the customer's eyes, but to the extent that you can really help them show them that you have experience in the space and that you're acting in their best interests, which is something we've seen in other utility spaces, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth, right? To really help make that switch will go a long way when you want to go back to them in the future and say, hey, I have other programs, or I want to do X, Y, and Z. So just really helping them through the long-term implications of the decision, and then helping them stick to it, right? We're seeing that in California. People are actually switching back to internal combustion vehicles after they make their first EV purchase because they aren't, They were having trouble with finding charging and making the really understanding everything that would be involved with the purchase of an electrical vehicle. So I expect that to be replicated on the commercial side as well. And if we're thinking about really helping these customers with a long-term decision, you have to bring that to them at the outset with a plan to mitigate and walk them through how they're best positioned to address it.
Yeah, Mike, just to build on all that, my first piece of advice would be to ask critical questions. Don't just go along with this because it's a trend. Somebody says we have to do this for our environmental profile. There are a lot of new players in this space, some not entirely mature and sophisticated, and you don't want to make a mistake. Mistakes will set you back, but also go into this with an open mind about what that world at the end of the tunnel can look like. Because I will say, as a EV owner, I would, unless somebody forced me, I wouldn't go back to an internal combustion engine. And I think if you're a fleet operator this is your bottom line, it is where you want to get to eventually.
Yeah. All right, we're got about 6-7 minutes left, so I will. We've already gone through the questions that came in, so I will allow each of you to kind of make closing remarks on where you see the next steps, or if there's customers in your space where they would get engaged, any of the above. So we'll go in the same order. Tom, you can start it off.
No, I think we've covered it. It's been great to hear from the other panelists, to hear, Mark's perspective, work in multiple states. I think we're all facing the same challenges. We are about a decade into this. We've learned some good lessons. I think we're, finding that developing those internal subject matter experts that can be that trusted advisor that Joe talked about for the customer. No one wants your project to succeed more than we do. It helps our bottom line, but we're also a party we're here. We're going to be here, for decades. We'll always be there. We want this to be a good experience that works for you, and we've been working to build up our resources to do it.
Great, Joe.
Yeah, I to the extent that we're still very much in the early stages of this effort, right? The focus for us is really strategic positioning. We expect that to evolve over probably the course of the next year and a half. And then the market will probably start to settle. Viewpoints will coalesce, consensus will be formed, and we'll really start to shift our focus more so towards execution, having identified the goals and the targets we want to run towards. So for New York City and Westchester County, it's all about trying to figure out what's possible right now, and figure out where the market wants to go and how we can help meet the state's goals and the policy objectives that are in front of us.
Great. Don?
Yeah, New Jersey has really aggressive state goals as well. They passed the PIV Act a year and a couple months ago, January 2020. And we're just really interested in being an important partner in helping to achieve those goals. I think, it's real important. Public service, electric and gas takes its name very seriously. We've been in public service That's our, primary motto and primary goal. And electrification is a huge benefit to climate change problems and to health problems. And I think that it's going to take a very integrated approach with our customers and with the utility and with the regulatory community together to achieve this.
Well said. And then Mark?
I guess two closing thoughts, building on some of the points made by my colleagues. One, I think it's helpful for us all to keep in mind that we were at the very beginning of what really is a transformative change, not just in transportation, but in the electrical infrastructure itself. This is going to be a long-term transition with ultimately really profound impacts. And it's not happening in a vacuum. We're going through vehicle electrification at the same time we're trying to increase renewable energy content, for example. And there are some significant synergies and challenges associated with doing those things at the same time. So I think we need to think through these broader questions about utility role and program design and regulatory perspective in the context of this broader transformation. And then secondly, as part of that, this isn't sort of an old school, let's just decide what the utility should do and then do it. This is a much more complicated, as I mentioned earlier, ecosystem approach to the market. There are going to be multiple market participants. The utilities will be involved, private investors will be involved, private contractors will be involved. All of that will be shaped by the perspective of the regulatory body. And that, in one sense makes it harder and more complicated and probably, something that will evolve over time. But it also creates a lot of opportunity to do a lot of very innovative things and to approach this transformation, in a way that can then maximize the impact. So I think it's a very exciting time that's going on, and we've got, as Tom said, we've got about a decade behind us, but we got a few decades left to go on this as well. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of your, echo all of your sentiments, and I agree. We really do see this as a transformative event, and that there is going to be significant evolution and change here over the next, especially 5 to 10 years in this space, and that people really do need to look at a comprehensive look from energy, electrical infrastructure, fleet perspective, operations, maintenance. There's a lot of aspects that go into these that you can't just look at one without the impact to the other. So I would like to thank all of you for listening into today's session. I would like to especially thank our panelists today for participating and being willing to be on another. I know everybody's on Zoom calls and team calls all day, but we appreciate sharing your thoughts on this space and what you each are doing as leaders in this space and in the industry. So thank you very much. And I will just close with we will be sending out an email to all of the registered participants with a link to the recorded version of the webinar. We will, so if anyone wasn't able to get it, they will be able to get it through that. We are also going to be posting the recorded version on our website. So if you know anyone that wasn't able to register and was interested, it will be on our website as well for people. So with that, I will end and thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.